All right. So, welcome to another meeting of the Leg Booty Mafia Book Club. We are discussing the Gilda Stories by Jewelle Gomez and Zami, another spelling of my name. I think that's the subtitle of that, by Audre Lorde. Actually, I could just check. I have the book right here. A new spelling of my name. I apologize. By Audre Lorde. And um, So I just want to start off by saying that I thought that the fact that both these two books got picked was really unfortunate because I think they go really well together. Um, I know Ian has not read the other book, but that's fine
I'm a fake
because
fan.
no, I tried to do two books that people could pick if they want to do the and nonfiction or the fiction book or do both. So it's fine that you only read the fiction book, but I do hope that you do read Zami. It is it's kind of like it's called like a biomythography. Um, and it's like this really interesting way that Audre Lorde approached the memoir. She's mostly known as like a poet, but she's also a lesbian, feminist, um, I don't thought leader. Um, especially as a black, more butch leaning feminist writer. Also, she um, had cancer, so she was really monumental in like the breast cancer awareness sort of push. Um, but I think it goes really well with the Gilda stories because obviously Gilda is a lesbian, and it sort of has like this really the whole book, the Gilda Stories has like this really interesting feminist current under it, which is something that um Jewelle Gomez talks about in her forward in the edition that I got. I don't know what edition you have or what edition is available in Australia, but um the print of the novel that I read was like a special was like a I think it was like a 25th edition novel because the book was first printed in 1991. They did in 2015 they did a reprint of it, which is I think is really great because a lot of these some of these we both actually both of these books are on the older side, as far as when you sort of have like this sort of like this more widespread. The newer a book is, the easier it is to get to usually, and the more different forms it's available in. So Zemi, doesn't even have an audiobook, whereas the Golden Stories is like an Audible exclusive audiobook. So those are just some interesting tidbits about those. I thought that they really were well together. Particularly, I really enjoyed both of them. Um, the Gilda Stories, I think, it took me a little longer to get into. Well, it didn't take me that long to get into Zami just because I was already interested in Audre Lorde. I've already read some of her other works, but the Gilda Stories, I am not the biggest fan of books that take place in the 1800s. So the beginning was kind of a little bit harder for me to get into. It really picked up for me once we started, jumping a little, once we got the 1900s. And then I was like, okay, now I'm really
Hmm.
more into it just because it, I don't know, it's not Gomez's fault. I think that she writes the story very beautifully. I just think that I'm not the biggest fan of Gothic writing. Um, Even though it's kind of like sort of like this mainstay in vampire literature, I don't really find I don't really get that. I find that I don't really get that much from it. I think it was really interesting the way that she approached it because it was so antithetical to, I don't know, the kind of vampire writing. Because, usually when vampire stories in the 1800s, for some reason, the vampire is a slave owner, and that is something that you have to wrestle with as someone that's reading these stories as a Black person, unfortunately. So, and there's like this sort of like Reconstruction vibe to it. If I don't know if Ian, if you know what Reconstruction is, but it was after the Civil
I
War.
can. I'm
After the Civil
vaguely
War,
familiar.
there was a period, the period after the Civil War in America called Reconstruction, and there
Mm,
was like this huge movement during Reconstruction. There was like, okay, so what now we freed all these slaves, what do we do with the slaves? And there was this battle in the government about how to deal with it. A lot of stuff happened, but another one thing that happened in that period is that one thing that went over was this like sort of like redemption of the South, and then that's kind of when we got, and as we sort of propelled into the 1900s, we started getting like all these, Confederate statues raised and all this stuff through the Daughters of the Confederacy. And, these people, these white people from the South who felt like they were kind of aggrieved in the Civil War, and they sort of like rehabilitated the image of the South, as like the Civil War was about states' rights and not about slavery. I don't know how slavery is taught in Australia, but um, well,
it's
depending
not.
on it,
Most of what I learned about it is through people on YouTube. So yeah,
yeah.
In Australia, like I'd say our equivalent would be learning about the like ongoing series of like policies and like really shoddy government behavior surrounding immigrants and also the immigrants and also like the indigenous population. Just there's just like this series of different policies they're introducing for that. But anyway, that's a different topic.
Well,
But
I don't know.
yeah,
I think it's sort of relevant because, like, if you're talking about um the Gilda stories, the character Bird, she's a
mm,
she's an indigenous person, and
mm,
she one of the main things with her is that she has to Gilda and her are both going through like different sort of struggles with their identity about around like them both being people that are surviving
mm.
while their people are being massacred. And obviously I think
Yeah, and just sort of
Bird's people to a larger extent.
living through the like ongoing failure to reach a resolution in a lot of ways
Which I
through
thought was
immortality.
a really interesting take on vampires that we don't usually get to see because the protagonists are usually
Mm.
white, and they can't really struggle with that kind of.
A lot of the times the Confederate soldiers, as have
Yeah.
been recently seen on YouTube, which I
Yeah.
didn't know was really a thing. I haven't watched most American vampire fiction, but
Well, it's not
yeah.
something that you really. It's just something that I don't know. It's something that always comes out of nowhere. Like for some reason, like there's this contention of like newer vampire media that is still very much white, but it's sort of like more from like a teen lens since
Mm.
like Twilight. Even though Twilight is, I don't think Twilight is technically um YA, but I think it is technically because Bella's underage
Yeah, I'd
for
say
most of
Twilight
it.
is young adult. I
But
think it's
but that
it,
was also
it's
kind of it also came out before YA was kind of really a thing. So like it's
yeah,
also
it
like
was like one of the like earliest like prototypical texts for YA, I think.
yeah,
It might
and
have
then sort of that
introduced a lot of popular elements.
yeah, then there was sort of like this explosion kind of after Twilight. Um, Even though like before Twilight there was other things like because before Twilight it was like you had middle grade and then you had adult fiction, and then like after Twilight, there was kind of like this explosion of YA, I think, and Twilight, and even in Twilight, there's a you know discussion of Confederate vampires, but which is
Hmm.
I think the video I was talking about was the video that was done by Princess Sapphic, where she has her video about
Yeah, yeah. That was
um
the main video I saw recently.
so, and then she also recommended the Gilda Stories in that video, which
Oh,
was,
did she? I would
yeah,
I
at the
that totally
end,
went over my
or
head.
so at some point in it, she recommends the Gilda Stories. I don't know if it's at the end or not,
Oh,
but
I'll just pretend I'm a real fan then.
she recommends, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting because I had already was planning on reading it because I don't think I watched the video. I don't remember when I watched it, if it was before the poll was ended or before I put it in the poll or after, but it I think I watched the video before I put it in the poll, and that's why I put it in the poll instead of because I was sort of wrestling with what I wanted to put in there, and I was always really excited about the Gilda Stories because um,
Hmm.
once I was looking for books to put in this, when I was looking for books to put into this, you know, bank of books I was going to use for this book club, I was like, one of the stories that stood out to me when I was looking for it was the Gilda Stories because it was a story, about a black vampire, and there's so few stories about black vampires, and I was really interested in the fact that she was, and not only just black vampires, but a black queer vampire. Even though there are tons of stories about queer vampires, finding one that's queer and black was really hard. So even though I wasn't really
Hmm.
looking for it, I was just looking for black queer stories, and then and then I just so happened to find one that was thankfully this because I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it, especially um, what were some of your favorite parts about sections? Because it's kind of like episodic.
Yeah, well, I've figured that out like after oop, that was my second alarm going off there, just in case I slept through. I was like, I'll show up 30 minutes late. Um, but basically, I think yeah, well, reading through it, I'm like, oh, all right, they don't seem to be connected. A lot of there's not tons of connective tissue, but then I realized the name of the book is the Gilda Stories, so it's sort of like episodic. I thought it was interesting that it's at the start of the book, I think in the foreword, I think it's the author speaking. I can't remember. It
Yeah,
was
it's the author.
but and she was like something talked about it being like an adventure story, and I'm like, I sort of disagree with the author on their own work in that way. I think it was more interesting that it's sort of like the emotional experience of immortality, as opposed to it being like a just like a mechanic. I think the book does a good job of illustrating the emotional experience of immortality. Like I remember I think it's like in the 1970s when she picks up the is it the stage writer? What's his name? Julius, is it? Um she picks up a guy, she turns a guy into a vampire, and I remember my gut churning because I'm like, oh, I don't know.
like like
He
us being
seems
men and
really
being like every time you see a man and a man in anything, you're like, I don't know, don't trust the man, only trust the women.
Oh, well, for me, it was more like he said, I was sort of the opposite situation. I'm like, he seems like such a nice guy. And I'm like, for some reason in my head, I'm like, making him into a vampire ruins his life. Like being turned into a vampire sort of like ruins your existence a little bit. It's like
But
that was sort of the mentality she had for what's her name from the 1920s.
and
Um,
Annabelle or Annalise,
Aurelia?
Aurelia, it is
Yeah, I
Aurelia, yeah,
think I
it is
remember it was
Aurelia.
like gold or light or something. Aurelia, and she's like doing like some community planning and stuff, and it turns into like grassroots or whatever. Oop, my camera's getting a bit
That's in
dusty.
the
Um,
yeah.
I think it's in the 1920s, but yeah, I was like, yeah, I guess like the mentality set up from that one. I'm like, she didn't turn Aurelia in the end because Aurelia had like a really firm foundation on her life. But then this other guy who was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd be able to turn anyone if I was in Gilda's position. I'd just be like it's like getting a tattoo. I'd just be like, I cannot commit to anything. I don't want to ruin, especially considering like it's massively impacting someone else's life. Like when in like I'm assuming we're okay to do spoilers here, obviously, but like
Yeah.
in the very last acts of the book, when she turns the person who's like attempted to take their own life, I was like, ooh, I don't know. That felt pretty dicey to me. But I
I don't
don't
know.
know.
I think that most I think it's interesting because most vampires, that's how they most of them go out, is by taking their own
Mm,
lives. Because I
mm,
think that um one thing that is common in these vampire stories that are like more like a study of like immortality, I think that you see that in the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. I don't know if you've read any of those,
I
but
haven't read that.
like the interview with the vampire, but or seen the interview with the vampire.
I don't think I've even seen it either.
Oh,
I
there's
remember
a good show out right now.
people were fussing over the recent one. There's a
The show that
saucy
came out.
scene between the two guys all over each other. And I was just, yeah, I haven't read that one or watched it. Yeah.
Well, I read it for the first time. I started reading those for the first time last year, and I kind of found that one of the common themes and like that, and it sort of reminded me of that here is that which is another book about a Confederate vampire, but the one of the things that she and Rice kind of gets into is that idea of like a lot of people aren't really like built for immortality. Like
Mm,
the strains is like living forever, way down on everybody, and you kind of see that in a lot of vampires in Twilight, in all kinds of vampire sources. Like the one thing that I think that was common around this period in vampire literature that gets talked about is like or just in vampire literature in general is that like there's like this weight of immortality that's on the vampire and um less of a focus on like raw brutalism of like it's like gothic horror instead of horror, like it's a lament about what is it to be a vampire instead of like looking at the vampire from um outside perspective looking in, as like Twilight does or the Vampire Diaries does. For like
mm,
you start out in those books, at least you start out at least in those books and in the other books where the main character is a human and is interacting for most of the story with the vampire as a human and then viewing wrestling with falling in love with a monster or something like that, whereas here in the Vampire Diary in the interview with the vampire and here the main character is turned early and then they are a vampire and they're wrestling with what it is to be a vampire from the perspective of a vampire. So
mm,
that's also something that's very interesting to that I think is interestingly explored here as the story goes on and you sort of um like Gilda kind of has to learn because she at first she wants to be a vampire and
mm,
then because like right before she's turned that's what they kind of that's kind of like one of the prerequisites that they look for, like the kind of vampire she is. One of the prerequisites they look for is like the person that they turn has to like want to be turned. And then so that's why she eventually so she is before she's turned. And then like once she's turned, after she gets left by Bird, she's kind of like she feels so
yeah.
lonely for so long until Bird eventually comes back to her and she's like, you've learned so much over this time, but like one thing that you still have to learn is that you're not cursed. Like this is not a curse. You have to like learn to appreciate that you're different from humans, you're not human anymore, and
Mm,
appreciate instead of longing, staying around humans, longing to be human, you have to cherish their life because of what something that they do. They kind of vampire she is, they cherish life. They don't kill people unnecessarily. And she says, you have to, you know, look at not be ashamed of who you are, like learn to love yourself, I guess, kind of in this new state that you're in as a vampire, which is like
mm,
interesting to like be a reader and like be like, You're like, wow, this even vampires have self-esteem issues.
Mm. Yeah, I think yeah, that was something I was found interesting at the start of the book. I was wondering if like the implication the author wanted me to have, like the impression she wanted me to have, was that like maybe the original Gilda was kind of an irresponsible person. It's like I don't know, because it's like
It's kind of interesting that
because that
she like killed herself
because
like
it's
right
in
after
like
she turned.
the first experience Gilda has as a vampire is this like kind of really serious breach of trust between the two. And like she's like, I want to die, but I sort of need someone to stick around to look after my girlfriend. That so it seemed like a very to me that seemed like a really unfair motivation to turn the Gilda we follow in the stories. I yeah, for me it sort of it came across to me like I wonder if the intention was like, yeah, I don't know, was that like maybe their relationship wasn't that great, or like there just wasn't actually that much trust there.
Yeah, and then she
But
also does it like while Bird is gone because the
she
original
waits for Bert.
Gilda and Bird, like obviously the original Bird is like, well, apparently everybody, it seems like everybody else like knew that, and then Gilda, the new Gilda knows that, the original Gilda wants to end it.
Mm,
Like everybody knows she's gonna do it. She's not really been keeping it a secret that she's, lamenting about doing this. Well, at least towards it seems like Gilda always had like this understanding about vampires, whereas like a lot of other people were like knew a lot less about it. But it seemed like Gilda was picked up on more things, and she was more intuitive about certain things.
mm,
But it seemed like all the other vampires knew because once also, it seems like all these other vampires have been talking about Gilda without Gilda even knowing about it because she gets there and everybody's like, "Oh, Gilda!" Like, "Oh,
yeah,
like, oh,
they
you
have
know so
like a
much."
group.
Like,
They have a
like
group
Bird is
chat.
going around like telling
They have
everybody about Gilda and like telling like all this like personal stuff about Gilda, and they just like people just talk openly about other people's personal business, which is kind of interesting in this book a lot. Like
mm,
they just share, like they're all part of like this club, I guess, and they all share this.
mm,
Well, at least at the beginning, once in the 1900s, Gilda's a lot more. She interacts with vampires a lot less than she does in the beginning novels, where like, well, I don't even know if she really interacts with I mean, the second section is where she interacts with with other vampires the most. The first section is she only interacts with Bird and Gil and the original Gilda, and
mm,
then the second section is she interacts with a bunch of vampires. Pretty much exclusively all the characters in the second chapter are vampires, and then after that it's just Gilda, maybe one or two other vampires, and the rest of the characters are humans. So
mm,
I also thought that was interesting that we kind of like we like intro the way it's written is like we kind of get this introduction to Gilda, and both in the first chapter she's called the girl because
mm,
which was also an interesting thing. Maybe we'll talk about, but um, and then there's kind of like this, you know, introduction on like everything about vampires, and then we get to the 1900s, and then it's like the story. Then it sort of gets into like the like episodic adventure kind of story.
mm. Yeah, you get the two different you get the first one where she's like it's sort of like she learns about community building and then like how she has to like sort of rip herself away from that because it's like ooh, it's gonna cause problems if I stick around. And then
Yeah, which is
she
kind of
sort of
like the
has
curse
to
of being a vampire, right?
and then she has to learn the opposite lesson afterwards almost. But yeah, or like a balancing lesson.
Yeah, like even though you have to uproot your life over and over again as a vampire because yeah, you live forever and people can't really catch on to the fact that you're living forever,
Mm,
because they just get weird about that kind of thing, I guess. But you have to
mm,
you have to like keep building life for yourself anyway. Like you can't just stop living because living is hard, I guess. It's
Yeah. Excuse me. I've just 2 hours sleep, but that's all right. What was I gonna say? Yeah, and then in the future, like it starts describing like things get pretty shitty. Things get pretty shitty after 2020. Although she did predict Zoom calls, which is interesting. The author, realizing I'm like, when was this written? When she starts talking about Zoom call, she like talks about video chats, except it's like slightly off. Like she talks about like pressing buttons and stuff, and I'm like, that language doesn't really track. But then, yeah, and then I'm like, okay, the book came out in the 90s, so like the early 90s. So
yeah.
she's pretty on the money with predicting Zoom calls. Although she didn't mention anything about the pandemic during the 2020 section, but
Yeah,
so
she was
I guess she didn't know
a
about
little off
that.
there.
But
Um, I don't know if you read
yeah.
Parable of the Sour, but that's a similar situation. It was written in the 90s and it predicted a lot of that's a what's the word? Dystopian novel that was written in
Mm,
the 90s that takes place in the 20s
but yeah, the
that takes place now in the 2020s.
it's just very depressing towards the end of the book when it's like, oh yeah, they know what vampires are now, and basically all of the rich people were like, yep, let's all become vampires. I want to live forever. It's like,
Obviously.
ugh, gross.
I probably would have turned. I probably
I
would have. I think I'm the opposite of you. I probably would have turned a lot of people. I probably would have been like thorough. I probably would have turned a reckless amount of people, and probably a lot of people that I probably shouldn't have turned in the hopes of.
mm,
Because I think I'm
finding
a
like long-term friends and stuff.
yeah.
Uh,
I
yeah,
think I'm a more. I guess in the way, kind of like Gilda was. I guess, or I guess because Gilda was kind of trying to be like Thorold in the end. The first Gilda.
mm,
Was kind of trying to be like Thorold, but it kind of didn't work out for her. She kind of got tired of it, I guess. But
mm,
then Gilda ends up living about the same amount of time. I don't know. It's they don't really talk about how old the original Gilda is, but she ends up living. But the book spans 200 years, starts in the
yeah.
1850s, ends in the
The
19
original Gilda
early 2050s.
mentions 300 years, but like not specifically. That isn't specifically how long she's lived for. And then there's the one that's like she meets Efi, who's like from ancient Greece or something.
Yeah.
A vampire from ancient Greece. I'm like, bloody hell. What kind of brain chemistry do you need to have going on to make it that long? Uh,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, and that's something that I think when you read like a bunch of vampire novels, like it's very rare for it's something that these novels that talk about the length of immortality, you don't really get a lot of vampires that are like super, super old. Like a lot,
Mm,
it seems like even in, there's like, reading a lot of different vampire stories. I'm probably gonna end up reading a lot of vampire books this year. So because I have plans. I have like what I kind of do when I plan out what I'm going to read. I have like, I kind of like last year I kind of bought a bunch of books and I'm planning on when I'm going to read them. So um, I'm going to get to probably a bunch of because I on a whim bought a bunch of the Vampire Chronicles, the Anne Rice vampire books, even though I probably am not gonna like most of them because I didn't really like the Interview with the Vampire that much, and I don't know. I've
mm.
only read that one, and I don't know if it goes up or down from there. So, or at least I don't know if it's gonna get closer or farther away from what I like in books.
What did you not like about it? Out of
Well, it's not that I
interest.
really didn't. It's not that I didn't like it. It's just it wasn't for me. I think that that book was written in the 70s. I think that you know it's a lot less free with its interpretation of queerness. I think that, the
Hmm.
show, the new AMC show that came out recently is much closer to what to my personal taste in entertainment media where you know I don't even think I think, I'm interested to see. I'm interested to read the second book and see how that book and her reception of that book and how people, because she didn't even intend it to be as queer as people took it to be. So I'm interested to see if it gets more queer or less queer, or if it gets more explicitly queer. Because the
Mm,
first book, The Interview with the Vampire, is not very explicitly queer at all. Sort of has these
yeah.
tones that I guess some people took as queer that he didn't even mean to be queer, because
Yeah, a lot of
it's really
it's
about
like
her.
I hear
But
it's like a lot of like what in Interview with a Vampire is like through like fan reception. There's like a culture surrounding the book, so
yeah, and I think that because of how anti-gay American culture was up until recently, it sort of shaped the way that the adaptations came out and what was
mm,
allowed to be put on TV. And because the original movie that was made from the book, and um because I think that from what I've learned about the series, is that she sort of embraced the queerness after the first one, but that when it came to the movie adaptations, they kind of stripped it out, because there's this really bad adaptation of Queen of the Damned, which is the third book, and um with but it has Leah in it, which is makes it popular. But that's about the other. But that's get back to the reason why I like this more than I like Interview with the Vampire, is that Interview with the Vampire is um it's written similarly. It's very gothic and romantic in the writing style.
mm,
But so but I wasn't as interested in a lot of the characters as I was with Gilda. I enjoyed Gilda as a main character a lot more than I enjoyed I forget, Louis Dupont is his name. The main character
yeah.
in the Interview with the Vampire. He's a white slave owner, and so I didn't enjoy that aspect of his
Yeah, I was gonna say,
character.
what's not to like?
And he's the main character in the book. I also it's it's interesting. Her view of vampires is a little more interesting to me.
Mm,
Jewelle Gomez's interpretation of vampires is a little more interesting to me, because I was kind of like parsing out like what were the weaknesses of the vampires, because she didn't explicitly say anything about it, but like we sort of like through them killing a vampire find out that um, the heart, you had to kind of like rip the heart out. It's
mm.
like the best way to kill a vampire, I guess, according, and like put them in the sun, because they have
That
like they have like these
mm,
protective clothes that keep them
yeah,
from
with the
burning in the
soil and
sun.
them.
And then they also have like this way of like they have to be like full of blood if they want to go out, and if they want to be up. Like the longer they are up, the more blood they need.
Mm.
And so it's her interpretation of like the way the vampires work is really interesting, I thought.
Yeah, that was the other thing is like when they kill the guy, I don't know if it was just like poetic language that they were using, but like when they kill the guy's like this horrific monster, or he's set up to be. But then like when they kill him, he like sort of like changes back into a human. It's sort of like the vampirism, like he changed, like his personality, like the monstrous element of his character is like taken away, and like it's sort of like hinted at as well with what's her name, the home wrecker lady, um,
Eleanor,
Eleanor, yeah. It's sort of implied with like Eleanor and the unhinged blonde man, that they,
Samuel.
yeah, Samuel. Um, they sort of imply that like vampirism like extends like an aspect of your personality almost, or like vampirism manifests differently in different people. And it was like you're saying how they were like vetting main Gilda at the start of the story to see what kind of vampire she'd turn into. Like vampirism, like sort of like magnifies or like accents your personality, and like
Oh, I think
yeah, I thought that was it. And then it like disappears as they're killing this guy, which is
yeah,
interesting.
and
But
also
it could have
like
just been
I think they were saying that it also like the way that you approach the killing also is the why they kind of have like this like the kind of vampire that Gilda is. They kind of have this fact
mm,
about the way that they go about drinking blood and how they treat humans. I think they said that that also maybe made him more monstrous, and I kind of got that vibe as well. And then so like after they killed him, he kind of returned to his original state. So I thought that was interesting as
mm,
well.
yeah, it was mm, yeah, I was like, I remember it getting to the end of the book. I was like, man, I guess I'm kind of a baby, but I kind of hoped they'd have like some like last chapter in like a slightly more distant future where they like figure out how to stop the nuclear winter from fucking over everything. Like
Yeah, I think there is like this sort of nihilism about um global warming that you find in like
it's like,
a lot of 90s media.
hmm,
Like I said,
but
Parable of the
yeah,
Sour, you have like
the
I
implication
don't
is that
remember
they're gonna.
when what's the book called? The
But
Handmaid's
also
Tale what came out, but
there's like the infuriating emotional experience of going from being a slave to watching capitalism fuck the planet over. I think that would be an aggravating life experience.
yeah, and I think that it's interesting viewpoint you don't get from a lot of media, and I think that's why I wanted to do this book club. 'Cause I think that when you read a lot of fiction that's written by more um, feminist, um, more intersectional authors, you get, and maybe even some socialist authors, you get a really great. Their their sort of nihilism is a lot different from some of the other, and you get authors that write fiction and how it informs the work, and it really creates this I don't know more I it's a lot closer to my personal um well I'm not super nihilistic, but it's the the views of the point of view of the author is a lot closer to my personal point of view than and my personal politics than some of the other um
Mm,
works that you might read in other fictions, like very different from like you know Anne Rice, who is a straight white devout Christian woman. So
mm, yeah, might have a different perspective on plantation owning vampires. Um,
yeah, sort of I think that sort of has nothing to do with you know Anne Rice is certainly liberal by her own account, at least for most
mm,
of her life, as opposed there's a period according to Anne Rice lore. I'm not really as steeped up into her lore, but according to her, she was like really, really devout Christian, and so like it kind of got, and then like she kind of broke away when the Westboro Baptist Church kind of became popular, and then they kind of
mm,
got really anti-gay, and then she lived in San Francisco for a lot of her life, so it kind of broke off at that point. But um, and then you can from her work, her work is very queer. Even though she herself is not queer, a lot of the characters are queer. A lot of characters are queer men. So something that we find,
mm,
I think that's something that's actually pretty common in vampire media before, at least in vampire work, is the queerness. I think that even the earliest vampire works, like it's like there's sort of the thing about like vampires and being an allegory for queerness. And so it's interesting to get a queer author's perspective on that and how it
mm,
informs her work as and how it informs her work, because this is explicitly queer in the writing, and it's not just like vampirism as an allegory for queerness.
Hmm. This is literally queer vampires. Yeah, there's a lot of very explicit sex scenes throughout the book with blood. But yeah, I suppose that
Which
would they be described as sex scenes? There's definitely nudity involved. But
there's a
maybe
lot of interesting. There's a lot of
vampire-y things that I don't get.
there's a lot of interesting laments about just nudity in general when it comes
Hmm.
to Gilda. But then there's like very explicit queer scenes that she has with, a lot of women. So which also I enjoyed. I thought that it was a really great way to experience, because it's not as um secretive about, or it's not just implied. It's or what I say, implicative, or instead of explicit, explicit. Yeah, implicit. It's not implicit, it's explicit.
Hmm.
So that was really great to experience because that's not something that, we always get in,
Yeah. It's,
especially fantasy and stuff. It's always, played to queer.
yeah, and also just like the just as everything gets adapted. At least this is for me because I don't read a lot. But like when things get adapted, they get sandblasted a lot. I think they like get all the edges get brushed off and blunted. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think you definitely wouldn't. They would not be able to like adapt. No, maybe now they do like an HBO show with scenes like that, but
Yeah, they could. I would only trust probably HBO to adapt this the right way. Maybe like a mini series, because you could. I don't know
yeah,
how you would do more than like a. I don't know how you would turn this into anything more than a mini series. Based off
yeah,
the way it's written, unless they like. I don't know.
really screw around with the pacing.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, it would have to be a
or
mini
like
series.
added. They would have to like add a bunch of years in between because it
Hmm.
jumps like 30 years at a time per chapter.
There's not a huge amount of violence. I don't know. I guess maybe I'll ask for your perspective. Do you think there was a lot of violence in this book?
There's like a fight per chapter, I guess. It's like a
Hmm.
so it's not a lot of violence. It's definitely not. I
Yeah,
wouldn't necessarily
actually.
characterize it as a violent book,
Because
but
I remember it not being terribly violent, like not having a lot of like fight scenes or anything. But then now that you mention it, there is like about one fight per chapter.
actually there's actually there's one fight because she kills because Gilda kills someone in the first chapter at the beginning, and then it gets
Hmm.
like really non-violent after that, and then it
Hmm.
gets violent again, and then she has a fight in the second chapter, and then she kills someone. I think in every chapter after that, at least one. She gets like
Hmm.
one person in every chapter after that.
Yeah, she's
I think.
racking up the bodies in the latter chapters.
I mean, but if you
But
think about how long she lives, I guess it's not. But then
yeah,
again, I guess how
and also
often do
they
regular?
almost invariably always start it. They almost always are coming after her.
Well, it's kind of like her mantra, right? She doesn't kill unless she has to, but
Hmm.
even though she kind of instigated the fight in the fourth chapter, but with the vampire, the first vampire she kills,
Hmm.
she kind of instigated that fight, but it's kind of like she did it for a good cause.
Yeah, the vampire was causing a lot of
Even though,
grief
and she
for
didn't even want to
people.
kill him, but like Bird is like, "Are you crazy? We have to kill this person.
This is
Like
like
he's not gonna stop coming after us."
he isn't gonna like change. He isn't gonna like go, um, I'll turn the other cheek. Uh, I think this person is like explicitly the way they. Oh, Are we still? Oh, we're connected. Sorry, you paused. You stayed so still for a few seconds. I got worried. I was like, oh no, my internet's dropped out. But yeah, it's just like it's just I think like the what we were talking about before, like the vampire personality element that like exists within each person is like their means of coping with immortality in a lot of ways. And so like this like what's his name? Was it Fox, I think? He coped with immortality by basically just like ragdolling people, basically. It
Yeah.
abused. He basically coped with it by basically assuming like godhood over them because humans are little weak flesh bags, and he can just sort of assault them and get away with it because he's immortal and they don't understand what's happening.
It's kind of
And like
alluded to in the
that
beginning that
wasn't gonna change if they let him live.
yeah. And it's sort of like alluded to in like the beginning of the book that that's kind of how like most vampires are, and that
Hmm.
Gilda is just lucky that, you know, she was
Yeah, they're
she was
the family, quote
she was like
unquote,
inducted into like this sect of vampires that's very, you know,
that don't just
modest
abuse each
and
other,
yeah,
abuse humans rather.
but also each other, I guess you would say.
Yeah. And then there's like Eleanor who's like sort of fraying on the edges a bit because she's theoretically inducted into the same family, but it was like they didn't like she wasn't
She's on the
properly
edge.
vetted. She
Yeah.
wasn't properly vetted before they got in. And then she goes and turns Samuel, and I assume Samuel's wife that we never meet. And Samuel is basically what we'd assume is like a standard vampire. Probably like he's probably like 150 years out of from just walking around wailing on humans all day long.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. I was surprised that it ended so far in the future. I was actually
Yeah,
surprised.
I wasn't
I thought it
expecting
was
it to get
gonna
all science fiction at the end.
I thought it was gonna end at like the 90s when the book was written, and then like
Hmm.
maybe a little into the future a little bit, but I didn't think it was gonna go as far. I also thought we were gonna move slower as far as like the year progression,
Yeah, yeah,
because
it sort of starts leaping ahead.
because like I don't think the first and second chapters are that far apart, but
Yeah.
they might be. I don't really remember that. Because I'm like, okay, we have plenty of time. We have like 140 years between when Gilda first turned and then like 1850 or 1850s, I guess. She's kind of like later on in the 18 maybe like mid 1850s, because
Hmm.
she like starts out as like a girl and she grows up as, even though they still call her a girl, which is kind of I don't know. She's like, I think it's like implied that she's like at least in her mid to late teens when when she gets to the original Gilda, and then like they turn her maybe like around 20-ish. I'm not really sure. It's not really explicit like how old she is when she gets turned.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because
Yeah.
it made me feel like they're kind of being this relationship they have with Gilda. I don't know if it's really appropriate,
Yeah, that's what I
but
was
also
thinking
like
as well.
she comes from like being a slave, and like she's treated much better there than she is as a slave. So it's also kind of like I don't know.
Yeah, that was the other part I was wondering about was like, is this relationship she has with Gilda One, Gilda the First, um, and Bird, is this relationship supposed to be like healthy? Because like we're introduced to it, and she's like the foundation on which she's turned into a vampire is sort of like kind of dicey. But
It's kind of grooming ish.
yeah,
Like
um,
if you look at
um,
if you look at it from one perspective, I don't know.
mm,
It's a bit groomy. So it's like
yeah,
interesting.
because she's like a vulnerable person, and
I guess she's like
yeah,
I don't know. But
but
also
she like,
like I don't know.
hmm, she goes back into yeah, and then she sort of like gets left to fend for herself afterwards. But I guess all vampire fiction's gonna be a little bit groomy-ish because of
Yeah, it's
them,
kind of
like
the kind of
for the
the vibes, I
inevitable
guess.
massive age and experience difference is gonna always be massive.
Yeah, kind of like how it works, I guess. But then it's also like, is that does that mean that it's um exempt from critique because it's the genre? I don't know.
Mm,
Like,
yeah.
'cause
Mm,
even if it's the genre, I think it's a little problematic that, so much of it is groomy.
yeah. I wonder if
At
like
least a
it.
little bit problematic. I don't know if it's
Mm,
not, and that's
yeah.
it's a short part of the book, but
Yeah, and also
um,
like people are like having this criticism and stuff of things like Twilight and stuff like that. It's like Edward's heaps older than Bella, etc. And it's like maybe it is one of those things you just need to like turn your brain off a little bit because
yeah,
it's
you
not
kind of have
real.
to.
It's
Kind
like
of.
it's fantasy. It's a fantasy fiction. Maybe just like cool the jets and just sort of accept the situation for what it is. But this
But
is
it's
not
also
like
like this thing where you're like, okay, yeah, it's fantasy, but like, why? And like, if it's fantasy, we could think of anything. Why can't we think of a way for vampires to not
it's to
be
not be
groomy?
groomy. Yeah. But I don't know how you'd even do that.
And it's
Like,
kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of interesting because it's kind of like what Gomez is like trying to do here. She's trying to like think of like trying to push the envelope of what we can have in our fantasy and what vampire novels could be. I think
hmm,
I'm a little disappointed that maybe we took this big detour into like bubblegum vampire kind of thing after Twilight, but
bubblegum vampire.
it's very it's a lot more fun, I guess, but it's a lot not very
Yeah, like that's
innovative.
yeah. There was sort of at least in this book, there's sort of a little bit of existential dread with every chapter,
Yeah,
and like the yeah, because she has that like small family with what's its name, the two bar owners, or at least they
right.
started out as bar owners. Um, what were their names? I don't remember.
Yeah,
This is
I don't
bad.
know.
Clearly I didn't read. Clearly I wasn't paying attention when I was reading the book. But yeah,
I
like
just
she
think you might
has
just be
that
bad
family
with
with them.
names. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely terrible with names. Like, yeah, I have like Asperger's syndrome, so I'm not gonna remember most people's names.
But
I
also,
guess that
like,
applies
I
to
find that
extents to
also with
fiction.
books too, where like, they don't really always say the name very often, and so obviously
Yeah,
and then a lot of the characters are only like they don't last
yeah.
very long
Some
because they're
last
very
for one.
fleeting.
I was able to remember Aurelia's name, even though she was only for one chapter. I guess maybe that
She made
chapter
an
was more
impression on
impactful.
you.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
made an impression. Um, yeah. But what was I saying before? Yeah, like the family that she does have she seems to be quite distant with a lot of the vampires. I don't know if we just like catch her at a bad time where she's like really engrossed in whatever the human activities she's doing is. But she has like that brief mentor student relationship with the two bar owners for ages, who are like basically filling in for Bird because Bird's having like a crisis. Um, but yeah, she's sort of like her relationship with the other vampires seems to be quite distant a lot of the time, even with like Effie. And it's sort of like I felt like the relationship with Effie was quite rushed because she only finds out Effie was a vampire like towards the end of the chapter that she's in, and then there's a really short chapter afterwards where she's like
Yeah, it seems like
living with that.
Gilda is not very good at finding other vampires. I don't know
Mm,
if she maybe like if you because she didn't even know that Fox was a vampire until like because she had been living there for who knows how long, and then
yeah,
she
it's
just
like
like she's like I didn't know, and there was no vampires. She didn't think there was any vampires around her, and then
mm,
like she
Like
finds out that
I get it
there's
with Effie
a
because
vampire been
Effie
there
is
longer
like
than her.
Effie. I get it that like Effie could like psychically shield herself because like Effie is basically a vampire god at this point. At the point in the story that we find them. But someone like Fox seems just like very reckless and decadent, and it just I would have thought she picked up on it quite quickly. Like when she does pick up on it, it's like when he's like stalking down the street or something. But it
Yeah.
takes a while.
But as we move into the second hour, I guess we do more talk about I guess I'll talk about Zami.
I'll sit here and listen to you.
Yeah, and you can give maybe you ask some questions if you have any questions about it,
Oh
but
yeah, I'll try and think of things to think of like prompts or something.
but I really enjoyed um I think that sort of what Jewelle Gomez is going for in the Gilda story sort of really ties really well into Zami, coincidentally, because she obviously they're both lesbian work, they're both feminist work. Um, but Zami is, a memoir about a feminist and, Audre Lorde telling her own story about her life. And I guess in a way she sort of like sees it as like her mythos, and that's why it's sort of like thought of as like a biomythography. And I was really excited to read this because I read some of Audre Lorde's other works, and um, there's this really popular memoir right now called like In the Dream House. So it's about like a queer woman who went through a domestic violence relationship. I haven't read it, but I've heard really good things about it. So I was really interested to read Audre Lorde's memoir because I was sort of like, okay, that's an interesting take on a memoir. I read a lot of memoirs. I was really interested to see Audre Lorde's take on a memoir because I read some of Audre Lorde's work, and she's a socialist, feminist, Black poet. So much of her work is influential to me, and I've gotten so much out of her work that I was interested to see what the starts and the beginnings of that kind of person were. And I think especially at the time when Audre Lorde was coming up, there wasn't a lot of, other Black feminist voices out there. I think there was kind of like an explosion at the same time with her and Barbara Johnson, I think, and some other Black feminist writers that came out of like the sort of like the all Black movement, that sort of like branched off from like the Black Panther movement and well, I don't want to say Black Panther movement because I don't think any of them were like, well, actually, I don't know. I think some of them were Black Panthers, but you sort of felt like Audre Lorde and Barbara Johnson and what's her name? What's her name? What's her name? One second. I don't want to get it. Just give me one second. I want to find it because I don't want to get it wrong. Asada Shakur and Angela Davis, right? So you have like these Black feminist poets. I mean, not poets. Most of them they're writers. Well, activists, I guess is the best word for all of them. That encompasses all of them. They're all activists, and they're uh sort of all came around the same time and sort of pioneered a lot of Black feminist thought as far as like abolition and socialism and our relationship to imperialism and in a way that I think a lot of it gets overlooked a lot in the telling of Black history. I think a lot of Black history gets really told like really commercial, and it's very they stick to a very particular group of people, and they even those group of people they watered down how um left leaning those people were. They make them a lot more centrist and cookie cutter.
And they also like, at least from my experience, from what I understand, they like to have like a point in history where there was like a resolution and everything's finished, gets wrapped up.
Yeah, which is interesting because a lot of the people that I just mentioned didn't really get started until a lot of they really get started until the 70s, and that's where you saw like sort of this explosion of like publishing because they really made a movement to get those things done, and how I think how queer those people are gets downplayed, and also like a lot of people want to say that like Martin Luther King, and then it ended 1960, late 1960s. So it's the role Vietnam played in awakening a lot of people, and how that sort of moved throughout the country and throughout Black feminist thought gets downplayed a lot. So I was interested to read Zami and see, what Audre Lorde's beginnings were, because I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know as much as I found out in this work. So, and I kind of refrained from Googling her because I know I planned on reading a lot of this. So I did do a little bit of Googling because interested. I think I always get interested, especially seeing if these people, these prominent Black people have like kids, or if there's other people, like what their, other people in their families might have been, or who they're connected to. So, but
Hmm.
um, Audre Lorde, being of Caribbean descent, was always really interesting to me. So it's interesting to see how her relationship to her home life, and then you see, especially at that time, there wasn't a lot, people didn't really come out as young as, definitely not as young as they do now. So you didn't have like people out in high school, at least not by choice, right? So
Hmm.
Audre Lorde didn't even know she was gay then. She grew up as a straight woman, and then to go from that to being, a butch lesbian, or whatever word you use for it today. I think be interested to know like how she would identify it today if she was around today, with how we've moved in terms of gender, especially because when you have like, I don't know, it'd be interesting, especially with the current talks about gender, and how there's so many problematic people, and even in the gay community when it comes to gender. So I think that would have been interesting to see her viewpoint on that day, as someone who um identified herself as butch. She identified herself as butch. So I think that would be interesting to see how she would identify it today.
Hmm.
um and then she has kids with her husband, and then she leaves her husband for a woman,
I
and
imagine
then,
that might not have gone over well.
well, I think you'd be interesting. I think you'd be interested to read how it goes for her. I think that it wasn't as explosive as people might have expected it to have been. Um, she obviously she was a feminist before
Hmm.
um she was a feminist before she was even gay. So like the or at least until she came out as gay. So to have her perspective, or like I guess her relationship with her husband, wasn't what most people would have expected her relationship with her husband to be. It wasn't oppressive, I don't think, at least from my perspective, and I think from her perspective as well. So it was a lot more amicable split, I guess. I think that, if people are honest with their significant others when they're going through things like that, I think that, it's not super hard for it to be amicable, because if people, nobody wants to be in a relationship with somebody that's not going to be in a relationship with them. And, if she had, I think so she had, you know, still been married to him, and she was away teaching, when she fell in love with a woman, and how that the idea that that wouldn't have even happened. At least I don't believe personally that it would have happened if it wasn't if he if their relationship wasn't perfect before that. You know what I mean? So like
Hmm.
this was just an interesting conclusion of the relationship, but I don't think the relationship was ever meant to be, especially since Audre Lorde considers herself a lesbian and not bisexual. So,
Hmm.
which I think is interesting in and of itself. And I think that, so many interesting things about Audre Lorde's life, when she gets, she gets cancer, which she eventually dies of cancer, but she gets cancer, and her experience with cancer, and her experience with amputating her, because she had breast cancer, so she ended up amputating her one of her breasts, and so she for a period of time she had one breast, and back then there was this really big push for um, prosthesis, so like it wasn't even like implants, like they would like literally have like a prosthetic breast. So, which was interesting to read about.
Hmm.
It's like thinking about like how different some things were such a short period of time ago, and how some things you would never even think about, like what sort of what was um what were breast implants like, what was having breast cancer like at the time, what she was really wary of, certain she was really wary of certain treatments, because like this she had breast cancer, I think, in the 70s, or so it's like that was a part of her experience. And I think that you have all these um stories that she has to tell about her place in the world, how her involvement in activism during the 60s, because Audre Lorde was born in, ooh, I don't want to get this wrong, but there's not a lot of years in this. I'll try to find it. She lived in the, oh, she was born in the 30s, I think. Born in the 30s. So by the time so that would have put her like as an adult during Brown v. Board of Education. So like the her place in it. Yeah, she's born in the 30s. So they're like the mid 30s in Harlem. So she wasn't like in segregation wasn't just in the South. So like she definitely, her experience in that sense. And then it sort of also reminded me of I read Cicely Tyson's memoirs, a lot longer, but because she lived for like 90 years, and it covers like her life from like birth to death almost. So I don't know if you know who Cicely Tyson is. She's like a black actor, like a really famous
Um,
black actor, like a really famous old black actor.
yeah, I would have only heard about her through like a YouTube video once.
Okay. So she's like her life was really prolific. But as far as like acting, but which is different from Audre Lorde, who was like prolific as like a writer and in activism. But so they were like weren't in the same space, but that they had like really similar beginnings. I think they were both born around the same time. I think Cynthia Tyson is actually older than her, and older than than Audre Lorde would have been if had cancer not taken Audre Lorde from us. Rip. But yeah, I just thought it was like really interesting, and I really got a lot from it. I would implore other people to read it. I don't know if it's really your speed, because, like I said, it is nonfiction, but it's very narrative. So you probably would enjoy it. It is similarly thick as far as like page count, like word count on page goes, I think it's actually more words per page than Gilda was. So it definitely is a little intimidating on the page when you look at the pages, but I think that it's not, I think as far as like pure word count goes, it might be a little bit longer, maybe, than the Gilda Stories, maybe. Not too much longer. I think I looked at it when I was looking at the when I put it in the like the thing and it wasn't that much longer. So um yeah, which is hard to judge because like it's like, oh, they do page counts, but they need to think about words on page as we were talking about before. So it it might be a little hard to read if you read it physically, just because the way that at least the edition that I have, because the way that the words are on the page, might like it more as like an ebook where you can like mess with the font size and stuff to be more comfortable for you. But um
Mm.
I would definitely recommend it. It was definitely a good read for me. Um yeah, and I really enjoyed it. So I got a lot from it as far as like feminism goes and how we as people view work and Audre Lorde has been to like Moscow, which is she was in Moscow during the Soviet Union, so she
Mm.
visited, um, which she talked about more in other works, but she just um, always really enjoy reading Audre Lorde's work, and she's originally a poet, so her writing isn't it also is very romantic in a way, at least her with her sentence structure. I don't even know what the good word for that is, but flowery, I guess, in her word structure, her sentence structure. So that's something to also keep in mind when reading. But it is a lot more narrative than some other. At least I think most memoirs are kind of narrative, but it's she calls it biomythography for a reason. It's very interesting, and a lot of really interesting things happen in her life. Goes through a lot of stuff. So
Is
I had
the
a really
word
good.
prose? Is that it?
Well, prose is the word for writing. That's what you
Mm.
call like the sentences and stuff. It's referred to
All
as
right.
prose, but it's not really like it's not an adjective. It's a noun. So
Mm.
that's not that would be the word for it. I was looking for more like adjectives.
All right. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Yeah, I didn't,
Clearly in my element. But,
I don't know what like I don't know what writing I don't know how like writing is taught in Australia or anything like that, but like
um,
how.
poorly, although not for the reasons you might expect. Basically, during my higher school certificate, which is basically like the thing you do at the end of high school, they basically give you three essays, one for each of the categories they mark you in, and just say, copy that every single day. And then you end up getting a good mark at the end because you hit all of basically they go behind the scenes and find all the marking criteria and then like a teacher writes the essay for you. Although in my defense, I didn't actually write that essay, I had my own one, but it was still very much fixated on hitting the specific marking criteria in order to get a good mark. So yeah, I'd say not great, very very formulaic English
Yeah,
curriculum in
what
Australia.
one thing I learned I noticed when I watch a lot of foreign media is that um like the English is like as far as like a book reading, it's not as um
Yeah, we did read a few books. There's like a very heavy focus on reading Australian, like consuming Australian media because they have like massive anxiety about the cultural hegemony of the UK and the US. So yeah, a lot of the books we would have read were Australian, although we did do Of Mice and Men and of I think To Kill a Mockingbird, and also I didn't. My class didn't do it, but there was also Mississippi Burning, which was a film, at least when our for some reason there's a really heavy focus on education. There's a really heavy focus on like traumatic American history. It's like,
Oh,
oh, okay, thanks.
that's interesting.
Maybe, yeah, like I'm noticing a trend with all of the texts that English teachers seem to pick. But yeah, a lot of the time it would have been Australian books,
Well, I
which,
think English teachers in general just they want to pick books that are, I don't know, indicative of a time period. So they want to get like they hit like multiple beats. They want to teach a little bit of history as far and
mm,
because I think it lends itself to discussion more than like books that are easier to read.
mm,
So you talk about like, but I also think that um people in high school are not as inclined to. I think they have a fear of like really talking about books. Like,
mm,
I think that when people are like, one thing I noticed when I was tutoring, I used to like tutor. I do tutor a lot, and like one thing I noticed that people are afraid to like when they write about books they've read, they are afraid to say that they didn't like a book, so they would like make up reasons to let that like they'd rather like make up reasons, make up their feelings about a book to get
mm,
a illicit grade and actually talk about how they actually feel about the media that they consumed, which I think is
yeah,
um definitely a shortcoming of the education system in a way because like people want a good grade, but
mm.
they're not as so they
They'll teach you about language techniques, like what a metaphor is, what the difference between a metaphor and a simile is, and stuff like that. Focus super, super, super hard on that, and like not actually consuming and digesting literature.
right, which I think is
Yeah.
something that I'm trying to get and with people more into doing through this and other things. So um hopefully you are feel more engaged with your reading
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. I'd say I've enjoyed both of the books that we've read so far. Um, and it gives me something to like work on and look forward to.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't read the books beforehand, so um
Mm,
I like have like a bank of books that I um have an inkling that relate into the that are in the criteria set that I have for this. And then
mm,
so I sort of have the books there and then I like stay away from like actually reading them even if I'm like really interested in them. So a lot of the books I read outside of this that are gay, I are like white because I like try to save the black gay ones for this. So um because
mm.
I don't wanna read the books ahead of time. So I'm
Or like
like,
be doing a refresher on them or whatever. But,
yeah, because I guess it wouldn't make that much of a difference, like as long as but like I don't know. I just kinda wanna I guess and then as books come out, we add them into the lexicon in a way of like saying, okay, now we can, talk about them. I have some like for instance, I have some friends that write nonfiction and they're writing books. So I'm probably gonna like those months, like near around the time when those books came out, we're just gonna read them instead of like talking
that'd be
about instead of like
some
voting on
cute,
what we're gonna
cute little
read.
publicity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I want to read them anyway, and I want to read them. I want to talk about them, and I'm really anticipating those books. So like, I don't want to wait for them
Hmm.
to win a poll.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, you can just rig the poll, rig the poll, and
Speaking
then
of, I will put something together. I'll try to get them together tonight so that I can post, and then um it'll be ready so that it'll, and then I'll end the poll. I don't know, because I want to give people time to vote, but like it takes a while
mm,
for people to get around to it, I think. So like
yeah,
it's kind of like this
you do need to
weird.
like you do need to like regularly prompt, I think. Remind people that it's a thing. But
Yeah, because I don't even know how often most people in the I don't I think a lot of people I don't think a lot of people in the Discord even check Discord that regularly. So maybe I'll need
yeah, I
to
know a lot of my
do a
friends
little
don't check
more.
Discord very regularly. It's
So
like
maybe I
I
need to
live in
do,
Discord, but I have to remember other people don't.
yeah. So maybe I'll, try to pump people into it a little bit more.
Hmm.
Um,
I don't know what other platforms you've got this spinning on, but yeah, like there's Twitter obviously, but like don't want to like draw the trolls in.
well, I think those people came because of the 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 Zoom thing. Like I don't think like before
Hmm.
that, uh my tweets about the book club were getting like really like regular type of interaction. So
Engagement, yeah.
yeah, so I think if I just put that, if I don't say the word Zoom,
Then
then I think I'll
they
be
must
fine.
have like a yeah, who knows what the hell they're doing. But yeah.
But I
Hmm.
will do that. Thank you for coming in. I'm glad you could
No
make it.
problem. I have
I realized though that when I actually first posted, I didn't even get the date wrong. So like I posted that I thought I got
yeah,
the
that's
date
what
wrong.
I was confused as well. And I was like, oh, do I get the date wrong? That's the thing. I've
Cause I don't know why.
2 days now. I've gone to bed early because I'm like, oh, I better get up tomorrow. And then I'm like, oh, actually it's went to bed early a day early, so
Well,
that might be why I wasn't able to sleep. But I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I guess like because I don't know. I was getting dates mixed in my head for a bunch of things, and I originally, and then like I didn't post like when I posted about the book. I meant to say what day the live was gonna be, but I didn't
Hmm.
say it until like the 20th. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
hopefully, we'll keep chugging along. More people will get in, and
Yeah,
we.
I do feel a little bit awkward that it's like 50% of the turnout population is a white person, a white man. But
But it's fine. I love talking about this stuff, and I think unfortunately some people that would have made it that were really excited about coming just couldn't um
mm,
do it, but they'll enjoy the resharing of the live, so that'll be good too.
mm,
So thank you for coming in.
no problem. Anytime.
Let me go ahead and